These events, we always encourage participation. It's not just about somebody coming up here and telling you a bunch of things and you go away and that's it. Please, I encourage you, and even after the event, to continue networking. It's events like this where we can come together and discuss. So about HR Strategy Forum, I sometimes like to call us the best kept secret. It's not something that everybody knows, but then once you know it, you're like, okay, I know it. So we are the California connection for senior professionals in the space of people's strategy. We've been around for over 20 years.
Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for the introduction. I'm Rajiv Behera, the founding CEO of Reflective, and Reflective is a platform that's trying to help companies build a performance culture, and we're doing that with enabling employees with the tools to give each other real-time feedback throughout the year, and managers to have better conversations more frequently throughout the year, because we think bite-sized feedback is how people improve. And we started 3.5 years ago, and we now have over 300 customers, including Comcast, Lufthansa, Disney, GE, Airbnb, Pinterest, Uber, Snapchat, a lot of other companies. And I do remember when we had roughly 10 customers, I met Josh for the first time, and he graciously took time out of his day to meet me, even though my company had no progress really, or we didn't really have any real reason to meet me. But he was very patient and listened to like what I was trying to build and what the product was about, and just gave me really, really good feedback on it, and really great advice on the market, because the market was new to me because I came from building games at Disney. So the advice was invaluable. Also, he told me, hey, if you can fix performance and engagement in one swoop, that would be really big for the market. So that really stuck with me. But yeah, so he's been awesome. Always been giving me advice since then. And yeah, without further ado, please welcome Josh Bersin.
Thank you, Rajiv. I think it takes a game developer to build the next generation of HR software, right? I think it's pretty obvious. That's the secret. Oh, go ahead. I'm always a little bit intimidated speaking to groups in Northern California because of all the places I go and talk to HR professionals, you guys are usually on the bleeding edge, doing things that no one else has even tried yet, and you've already explored a lot of the things that other people haven't even thought about. So bear with me and feel free to ask me any questions. I really do think we live in our area, in the Bay Area, and certainly in Southern California too, in a different world of management. Management is different here, and companies are different, and culture is different, and it's a difficult place to work because it's so competitive. So we see a very sort of unique slice of the world. My background, for most of you who may not have heard about what I've done for the last 15 years, I am not trained in HR. I've never studied HR, and I've never done HR. But I have done research on HR for about 20 years, and in a very consultative way, tried to figure out what it is that is working and not working over and over and over again. And if you look at what and then we ended up building a little company about that, around that is now part of Deloitte. And if I look back at all of the research we started doing around 2000, 2001, and where it is today, it has evolved at least 5 times. And the way I know that is our projects are basically 12 to 24-month research projects on various disciplines of HR. And if I go back to the first one we ever did, which was called the High Impact Learning Organization, we're now doing the 5th version of that. And I can go back and look at each one and see what's happened year over year. So it's hard to do what you guys do. It's a really challenging role because you've got technology, business, management, the economy, business cycles, demographics, nationalism, political issues. All of that affects what we do. So it's a very challenging career. So let me talk a little bit about, for the next hour, what's going on, both from a research standpoint, and then I'll share sort of my own personal perspectives. The last maybe 9 to 12 months at Deloitte, I've been on the road. Cherie knows this, constantly talking to people about stuff. And that's kind of what people do in these consulting firms. If you're not on a conference call, you're not working. So that's kind of the way it works. So I'm going to share both the data and the research and my own personal perspectives, and you guys ask me questions along the way. So the first is that every major corporation is going through a reinvention of its core business model. Not the people practices, but what you sell, how you sell it, who buys it, how it's delivered. And the word digital is currently the word of choice. I would imagine a year from now it won't be called digital anymore. It'll just be business. But right now, everybody from Walmart to Exxon to GE to IBM to including the tech companies here, including Facebook, who is continuing trying to be more digital, is trying to figure out how to be more digital. Not just do digital stuff, not just build digital tools, but be digital. And the definition that I've come up with for digital is digital to me means meeting people where they are. Delivering something that people can use exactly when they need it, which is really hard. And that's kind of what Rajiv has done with his software. It might mean an app, it might mean a wearable device, it might mean a person, it might mean something else. But it isn't just mean build a bunch of apps and your business gets better. It's the way you think about it. That research, by the way, found, this is about 9 months old, this research was done with MIT, 90% of the companies that were surveyed, 3,000 companies were surveyed, 90% of them said their business models are being disrupted, 70% of them said we don't have the right leadership or management infrastructure to adapt fast enough. So I'll talk more about that. A lot of the research I'm going to share with you comes from the Deloitte Human Capital Trends, which is a project that's about 50 people that I'm one of the leaders of. And we go around the world and get many, many companies to talk about what's going on. And here's what I think has happened. Technology is now advancing at a near linear pace. My daughter's boyfriend works for Snapchat, so now I'm all into that. Which is actually, obviously it's now, Snapchat has disrupted Facebook, so Facebook's turned itself upside down to try to figure out what to do about Snapchat. But business productivity is not going up. I mean, we have more software, more tools, more AI, more computers, more phones than I could ever have imagined in my career, and the business productivity numbers are barely moving. We're about 1 to 1.5% increase. If you go back and look at prior industrial revolutions, and most people will say there have been 4. The first one was the invention of electricity, when the electric motor kind of took over the steam, or the invention of the steam engine really was the first one, which really replaced horses. The second was the invention of electricity, which was when the motor took over from the steam engine. The third was really the invention of, which basically created telecommunications. The third was the original invention of computers in the 1970s, and now this new one, which is called digital, which is sensors, AI, cognitive technology, and mobile. In all of the prior revolutions, economic productivity went up by 20 to 30% in the next decade. This one, no productivity increase to speak of. Now, I know why this is, and this is actually another speech, and I'm going to be giving at Impact. Sure, you'll hear more about this. But I think what happens is, if you look at technology, it takes an entire generation of management to figure out how to re-engineer work around new tools. If you take an existing manager and give them new tools, they will try to do the same thing they were doing before with the new tools, and they won't do it that much better. You need somebody to come back and say, wait a minute, that whole approach is wrong. We need to do it completely differently. For example, I was reading a book on this by a very interesting professor from Oxford. When the mills and all of the original automated yarn and fabric manufacturing started in the late 1800s, it had almost no impact on the productivity of garment manufacturing for 20 years because no one knew how to use the machines. It was a decade, 2 decades later when managers came in and redesigned factories, came up with the concept of real-time manufacturing, lean. All these ideas come in the next generation of leadership. And that's what's going on in business, is we are, and that's why I think there's a generational change in leadership that's needed, is we need to kind of rethink the way we actually work. And that's why this whole thing about the future of work is such a big topic. The other thing that's affecting HR practices is the political environment. You know, individuals adapt to technology very fast. I mean, we all know how to use Amazon.com. We all know how to use Uber. We all know how to use our phones. I mean, last night I ordered some food online. It's just trivially easy. Organizations, much, much harder. Political institutions, even harder. Way behind. If you look at all the debates we're having in the United States about immigration and healthcare and all the stuff that's going on, it's almost painful to see how out of touch it feels like it is with the technology evolution that's happening in our daily lives. And then businesses are caught in the middle, because businesses are feeling pressure from this as well. I mean, the funny idea, if you think about the idea of BYOB, bring your own device to work, or BYOD, was a radical idea. Companies were completely afraid of it because individuals were having so many productivity improvements from their personal devices. They basically said to their companies, I'm not even going to use your computer because it doesn't do what I wanted to do. I'm going to use my own because I can get work done faster. And now companies have finally kind of come to grips with that and said, yes, it's okay, and we'll actually upgrade all our technology too. Another dimension to this that's affected our jobs in HR in a very significant way is the fact that individual employees are mostly overwhelmed by all this. I was joking about the conference call, culture that I'm in. I can certainly speak to my experience at work. I'm working more hours in a relentless, never-ending world than I could ever have imagined. I entered the workforce in 1978 when there was no voicemail, and I remember. There was, you actually had to bring a briefcase of paper home if you wanted to work at home, for those of you who are sort of my age. And you would go home and there was no work to do. You just were home. You just do other stuff. And then the next morning when you got into the office, you'd start working again. I mean, we're so far away from that now. You certainly know what it's like here. You get on the BART train and it's almost ridiculous how busy everybody is standing in line, on the train doing work, last night when I was on the train, everybody was doing conference calls, listening to something at work on their way home. And employees have kind of had it. I mean, I've shown this chart all over the world, talked to organizations, everybody agrees this is a problem. And it's a problem in two respects. One is individually in our own personal health and life and family, and this piece of data here is very sort of unfortunate that a lot of people are beginning to realize that I can't balance my family life and my work life, so something's got to give. And the second is organizationally, we're not getting as much work done because we're so overwhelmed. And all of the new tools, Slack, Workplace by Facebook, Microsoft Teams, the new stuff that Cisco's doing, Google's new tools, the reason they're all selling that new software is they really believe we're going to become more productive if we use all those new tools. I'm skeptical, to be honest. I think the jury's out whether all those tools are going to make life better or worse. I do think one of the things that does help is actually something we have to do. We have to teach managers how to teach people how to do less. We have to teach managers to give people fewer goals and give them more clarity about what is important and what isn't important, and design work teams and work practices so people know what to spend their time on. And they're not constantly feeling this sense of FOMO, like, well, I don't know if I should go to that meeting, or I should respond to this email, or I should get on this conference call, or I should get on a plane and go to this other thing. I mean, we're all feeling that all the time in most companies. It is managers' jobs to fix that. GE, who reinvented its performance management process several years ago and has been doing this many, many years over and over and over again, has taught managers to teach their employees how to do less and to give them the freedom to not show up at meetings, not respond to conference calls, and spend more time with customers on the things that are most important. That's an HR, that's a management problem. That's not a technology problem. So we have to, to say nothing of the fact that we now have a whole emerging industry of wellness tools and everything else that are trying to help with this. Here's another piece of data that's a little bit surprising that I just wanted to share. We're also taking less vacation. I mean, not only are we working more hours and feeling a little bit more stressed out, we're not even taking as much time off. And the reason this is kind of ironic is when the computers were first invented, for those of you that are around in the 1960s and 1970s, the dream was we were only going to have to work 3 days a week because all the computers would do all the work and we would just stay home. And the opposite has happened. So we have some significant issues in organizations that are affecting work. And, by the way, employee engagement's not going up either. Data comes out on this all the time. I look at the data from Glassdoor on a very regular basis. For 8 years, I've been plotting the data on Glassdoor. It has not moved an inch. It's the same average as it's been since 2008 during the recession. We have not figured out how to improve engagement. Now, I'm going to talk for a few minutes later about what I think is happening to the engagement industry. But if you look at this curve, this bell curve, there are companies on the right that are doing a good job of managing their people and getting people engaged. And if you study and analyze who they are, they're not tech companies at all. They're not necessarily small companies, and they're not necessarily new companies. The only thing that's unique about those companies on the right is their leadership and their management practices and their focus on people. So any company, no matter where you work, in a small company, big company, tech, or otherwise, can fix this. You don't have to be Airbnb and have free food and free unlimited vacations and all these other benefits that get kicked around here in order to build a great organization. So let me go through now, for the next 20 or 25 minutes, the 10 big trends that we have identified in this new world of work, and walk through them one at a time. This is from survey research that we do in Deloitte every fall. The 2017 report was published in March. A lot of you may have seen it. There's a long report. I wrote a lot of it that's available for free on the Deloitte website. The 2018 report process is starting now. We're actually going through a process of hypothesizing what the next set of trends will be. The way this works is we send surveys to many thousands of people, and we ask them to rank the issues they see in their organizations, and we give them about 30 things. And it's amazing, actually, really interesting what comes out of this. And then we also ask them to rate their readiness to address those issues, so we actually can figure out what's important versus what's urgent, and what are companies catching up and what are companies falling behind on. And so that's what this report is. These are the 10 topics, and I won't go through them. They're on this slide. They're a little bit hard to read. But let me go through them one at a time. The first one is something Edie and I were just talking about during the intro, is the fact that organizations, the basic design of organizations is broken. The functional, hierarchical, up or out model of business isn't working anymore. Now, if you go back and read the history of why companies are structured this way and why we have hierarchies and pictures on the left of org charts that show, VPs and senior VPs and directors and managers and senior managers, the reason we have all that stuff is that businesses made money through scale, industrial efficiency. And so most business professors and books have been written on this. We'll go back and find you examples of the automobile industry, the steel industry, just about every industry that we have got more profitable as it got bigger by reducing cost per unit and hiring more people to do more routine tasks so they could do more and more things faster and faster and faster at an increasingly lower cost. And that was certainly true up until probably the 1980s and 1990s, that the bigger you got, the more profitable you got, and you went down the learning curve and got better and better and better at whatever it was you were doing and made more money the more structured you were. And so the idea of a span of control was a measure of efficiency, and org design was pretty much deciding what this chart would look like and making sure you didn't have too many managers so that the span of control worked. Since then, of course, with the advent of mobile phones and email, we don't really work like that anymore. We work in teams. People actually work like this. The salesperson talks to the product manager, and the product manager talks to the engineering manager, and the engineering manager talks to the head of finance to get more money, and then they go back and forth, and all of a sudden there's a new product or a new feature or some new capability in your company, and they're all in different functional areas, and they certainly don't ask their boss for permission before they talk to each other. So this structure that we built isn't really helping. And we are doing work in Canada. I was just up there last week with a bunch of companies helping them with this. The problem is almost everything we do in HR was designed around that. How we hire people, what the job description looks like, the job title, the job level, how people get paid, how people get promoted, how we assess leaders. I mean, I could go through almost everything that you find in the typical HR books, and it's really designed around this kind of an organization. So we're in the early days, probably second or third year, of figuring out what a real networked organization looks like. I happen to be, working as hard as I can to try to figure this out. Any of you that have good ideas, I'm absolutely interested in talking to you. One of the things we know is that human nature is to work in small teams. Research was done at MIT that shows that we spend almost two orders of magnitude more time with people that are within 50 meters of our desk. We were talking this morning about having open offices and why people are moving to these big buildings. Because we spend more time with people that we're physically close to, and when they're not around, we don't talk to them because we don't even think about them. So physical proximity actually creates productivity, even though we have all these virtual tools. We also know that there's a limit to size. Big teams don't perform as well as small teams. That's the Jeff Bezos 2-pizza rule that everybody's read about. W.L. Gore, who's a very famous chemical company that's coming to our conference in 2 weeks, has a rule that if a business unit has more than 100 people, it's time to split it up. We don't have businesses that have more than 100 people because they know that in about somewhere around 100, 150 people don't know each other anymore, they don't have personal relationships, and it's harder to get work done. And W.L. Gore has been a company that's outperformed and succeeded in their particular market for decades with that business model. Most big companies haven't figured this out yet. And there's a lot of work going on to try to understand it. I'm going to Europe in a couple of months, actually going in a couple of weeks, but there's a company over there called ING Bank that you may have heard of. It's a very big bank that basically threw away their whole org chart. They went to Spotify, they visited a bunch of agile software companies, and they basically redesigned the way they do branch banking, IT, finance, HR, everything around agile. And they did away with their org model, and it seems to be working for them. but it's still early days. I had a call about a month ago with the CFO of one of the largest automobile manufacturers. He was absolutely furious and wanted to talk incessantly about why Tesla's valuation was greater than theirs. And then as we got it, and once he cooled off and we stopped talking about that, and we talked about the problems and the issues, the problems in big automobile companies are really the way they're structured, the way they build cars, the way they design them, the way they throw them over the transom from engineering to sales, and they don't live with them on an ongoing agile basis. So we need to get behind this and really be part of it. So that's number one. I'm sure a lot of you have ideas. And one more thing on this. I've had the opportunity, being in Deloitte, to see how this works. Consulting firms get this. If you've ever worked in a consulting firm, this is the way it works. At Deloitte, and I'm sure this is true, I imagine it's probably true at other consulting firms, there's no org chart. There's only 5 levels. Most companies have 30 levels. There's only 4 or 5 levels at Deloitte. If you want to get promoted, you go through a process with your sponsor. You don't have a boss, you have a sponsor. Your sponsor is called your goal endorser. Your sponsor's job is to help you put together your resume so you can go through a board of peers to request a promotion so your peers can decide if you're ready for a promotion. And it works really, really well at Deloitte. Now, it means that you have to build a network of people, and you have to work together, and you have to be collaborative, and you have to get to know a lot of people, and there's a lot of conference calls, and there's a lot of meetings, and there's a lot of dinners, and there's a lot of face-to-face stuff. There's a lot of people flying around getting to know each other, but the human network works really, really well, and every company is like this. So I could give you a lot of examples of that. So that's number one. Number two that came out of the research is the enormous growth in demand for careers and learning. Seal knows this, and a lot of you that know my background, I got into this world in the learning industry in around 2001 when we were first starting to figure out what e-learning was and page-turning stuff on the web. That is completely changed, as most of you know, and the demand for new career models and better learning is now number 2 around the world after org design. It was number 5 last year. The Net Promoter Score of L&D, based on the research we're publishing next month, is -16, which is probably lower than the IRS. And I'm not saying you guys aren't trying really hard and we don't have great people in L&D. The L&D world moved very, very fast, and we have not caught up. First of all, every business is in the people business now. Every business is in the IP business. If you want to become digital, you've got to build software. You've got to think about your business model differently. You have to train people. And career models have gotten out of date. 50% of millennials will live over the age of 100. So many of the employees in your company will have careers that will span 60 to 70 years. If you have a 60 to 70 year career, do you know what the average life of a company is on the S&P 500? 15 years. So the idea that you're going to hire somebody from cradle to grave and they're going to work for your company all that period of time, you're lucky if that happens. I mean, in Canada it seems to happen because there's a little bit more longevity in the organizations up there, but it's unusual. So you have to design your career model around the idea that people are going to move around and they're going to move out and come back. In fact, in Deloitte, they call them boomerangs. One of the most popular hire in Deloitte is a boomerang. Somebody who left Deloitte to work in industry decided they didn't like it and wanted to come back. And so there's been a lot of cultural reinvention going on in Deloitte to be okay with that. You know, because it used to be if you left, well then, you know, you went off the end of a cliff and we don't want to talk to you anymore. So that's changed. We looked at career models in companies in some research we published a couple months ago, and fewer than 1 in 5 have traditional career models today. Now, it's not easy to build a flexible, agile, facilitated talent mobility model in a company. There's a lot of things that work against it. For example, when people do hiring, will hiring managers give internal employees preference, or will they hire from the outside first? If the hiring manager wants to hit his or her numbers, they'll look for the best person wherever they are. And if they can't find an internal candidate, they'll skip that and they'll hire somebody from the outside. But that might not be good for the organization. In fact, I remember a CLO I met many years ago made a comment to me. She said, what I tell managers is that the people working for you don't work for you. They work for me. You're just taking care of them for a while I decide what their next job is going to be. That's the kind of philosophy that companies, and I just popped into my head, I just remember that conversation, but that was sort of a really kind of profound way to think about it, is that, you know, your organization thrives by enabling people to move from role to role, even though individual business units may not feel that necessarily. So this is a, you know, relatively tricky problem that companies are dealing with. In the area of learning, I will just give you a minute on this to kind of look at this. I wrote an article on this a couple weeks ago that came out, a lot of people have read. Everything that we thought about learning is changed. 70, 20, 10, you know, kind of came and gone. Traditional e-learning, nobody even wants to use it anymore. The types of, even TED Talks are too long for people. I've heard that. Oh my God, they're 12 minutes long. I don't have time. Or maybe they're 18 minutes, which is like an eternity. Whatever it is. And by the way, it's got to work on my phone, and it's got to be available at the touch of a button, and I don't have time to search around. And if I can't find it in the first page of search results, I'm not even going to look. You know, it's really hard. I mean, this is not easy stuff. If you're not Rajiv and you haven't built games, you're going to have a hard time building a great learning experience. Now, the other part of this industry is the part that I got involved in early, is the learning management systems business. You know, learning management systems industry is, you know, $3 or $4 billion of software. Most of you have one. I guarantee you, if you have one, it was probably architected in the 1990s, maybe early 2000s, around the old models of learning and the old models of digital learning. The new generation of learning management systems is barely out the door yet. It's being reinvented right now by a bunch of small companies. And virtually every company I talk to is buying another layer of software to sit on top of their learning management system that is trying to create a learning experience. Rajiv, this is another business opportunity for you guys when you get through with performance and engagement. And you know, you can go try to find it, and you know, you've got companies like Degreed and Edcast and PathGather and a bunch of other cool companies building this new generation of software, but are in the very early days of this. And so I think this is a challenge. And we're doing a lot of consulting on this right now, but I think it's generally something we're just going to have to hunker down on. A piece of research came out from Cedar Crestone, which is a company that does research on the HR tech market. And Stacey Harris, who used to work for us, did this, and she found that the #1 growth segment in HR tech right now is learning software. So we've gone through a big cycle. The learning software market was really boring for the last decade. I kind of got bored with it. It's back. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of AI tools, a lot of interesting things there. So we can talk about that during the Q&A. Let me give you one thing to think about on learning. This is, I'm not saying this is perfect, but this is my perception on what's going on. If you want to build a great learning experience, you have to use design thinking and think about the experience somebody has on a job. When you start a job, you don't know much at all, and you have a lot to learn about the job, the systems, the people, the organization, the customers, the people you're serving, many, many things to learn very, very fast. And then you reach a point where, you know, maybe a year into it, you kind of got it, and you're kind of bored with it, and you're ready for something new. And if you're a millennial, you know, you're probably looking for another job somewhere else. And you start to feel a little bit, you know, like maybe I need to move on. And if you're lucky, something happens and you get a developmental assignment, you get promoted, you get a new job, you get moved, and all of a sudden you're back up the learning curve again and you feel good. And we're all wired like this. I mean, I don't think anybody really likes to live in this kind of trough of their career. If you're not lucky, you have this experience and you leave, or you retire in place, or you just kind of do the job and, you know, lose interest and spend more time at home with your family. The question is, how do we improve this for every employee in every role in your organization? That's really where the learning comes in. During these transition points, you need a heavy dose of learning. For the first 6 months to a year in a job, you need a lot. You need not just onboarding. You need to meet people. You need to learn systems. You need to learn what doesn't work. You need to learn, you know, in the case of Deloitte, all of the various compliance things that you have to do, all the websites you have to go to check everything all the time. It takes a long time to learn all that. Then then you're kind of at this, and during this point you need it. In the interim, you need small pieces of learning. And some of that you can decide yourself. I mean, I know when I'm not, able to do something and I need help. If I can find the answer, I'll watch the video or call the person on the phone. Or some of it should be prescribed for you. There are tools now in the learning industry from companies like QStream and Axonify that actually will give you what is called spaced learning. They will give you learning interventions at a particular point in time that you are most likely to remember them. And here's an interesting piece of research that you may or may not know about spaced learning. Research has been done that shows that trying to learn a lot of things at once, you forget most of it. The best way you learn is to have space between the learning. So you learn something for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you are asked a few questions about it to force you to retrieve it, and then you don't hear about it for a day or two, and it comes back, and you get a reminder, and you learn a little bit more. That's actually the most effective form of learning based on a lot of research that's been done. None of our technology was ever designed for that. All the LMSs, all the stuff, 70, 20, 10, we never really figured this out. This is part of the new generation of learning that's taking place. And the other part of the learning industry that's really been interesting and has not necessarily quite evolved yet is how do you get credit for the learning that you did? Do I get promoted, or will other people in the company or outside of this company actually hire me for another job because I went through all this learning, and how do I credentialize myself? And I don't think the MOOC companies have figured this out yet. They've been working on it, but it is going to be coming. The third big trend is the revolution going on in recruiting. 61% of the companies that responded to this survey told us that they don't believe their company knows how to recruit well. 61%. And the recruiting industry is very complex and very, very fragmented in solutions. The average recruiting organization has 24 tools for different parts of this, whether it be employment branding tools, assessment tools, video interviewing tools, there are applicant tracking system, there are analytics system. It's very, very complex. And despite all of that technology and all of these tools, what the research shows is that the most important thing in recruiting is the relationship between the recruiter and the hiring manager. We've done this research twice. We're doing it again right now. I remember I interviewed the head of recruiting for Halliburton a year or two ago, and I asked him, of all the things you've done in recruiting, and actually in the oil and gas industry, it's very hard to recruit people because there's a very small number of petroleum engineers, and it's a very, very small labor pool. And they're all, basically competing for the same people. He said, what I've learned over the years is that of all the things we do, the employment brand, the website, the sourcing, the most important factor in recruiting is the quality of the recruiter. Does the recruiter really understand the job that this manager wants to hire for? Because the manager usually doesn't. Most line managers are not experts in recruiting. They're experts in getting work done. So they don't always know what the right fit is going to be. And the recruiter knows your culture. They know who's succeeded, who hasn't succeeded, the sources of people that are more likely to succeed in the organization. All of those things are human things that have not yet been coded into software. So this is a very, very critical issue. And the reason this jumped up in importance this year, I think, is because the labor market's gotten tighter. I just read this morning, now I think we have 4.4% unemployment rate. I don't know that I've ever seen it that low. I think that's the lowest it's been in maybe 20 years. So even though there's a lot of people in the Midwest and small towns that can't find jobs, in places like the Bay Area, it's pretty hard to recruit people right now. Everybody's got more opportunities, certainly high-tech people, than there are out there. And the software industry in this is going through a revolution as well. Applicant tracking systems are as old or older than learning management systems. Rajiv, when you get done with learning, you can work on this next. I'm giving you all sorts of advice here. But this is a very tricky market. We've got three of really the hottest companies right here. Obviously we have Oracle and SAP and Workday and all of them, but we also have Lever, we have Smart Recruiters is here. We've got some really incredible recruiting technology companies right here in San Francisco. And they are going to eventually reinvent this. The new world of recruiting software looks more like sourcing software and less like applicant tracking software. And the other thing, of course, that's huge is the role of LinkedIn and Glassdoor. We have LinkedIn that's revolutionized the sourcing market, and Glassdoor that's revolutionizing the employment brand. And so if you're not keeping up to speed on all the offerings from those two companies, then you're also missing out. So this is a very, very big problem and continues to be. The fourth one is the reinvention of what we used to call the engagement market, which we're now calling the employee experience. I'll give you my little, opinion on this, and, please don't quote me because I don't want to get in too much trouble. But I do think the engagement industry is a dinosaur and needs to be put to bed. There's nobody from Gallup in here. I'll tell you here's how I came to that conclusion. In 2000, I don't know, Seal, if you were with us, in 2010 or 2011, we decided we were going to do research on employee engagement. So we hired someone who was an employee engagement expert. And I said to her, okay, I want you to go out and interview, 24 companies on what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, and then let's build a survey and really figure out what is going on in employee engagement and what are the different levels of maturity and so forth. And she said, I don't need to do that. I've already done the research. And I said, what do you mean you've already done the research? She said, I wrote a book. Here's my book. If you just read my book, we don't need to do any of this research. And that's the problem with the engagement industry. All those books are great, and I'm not saying books aren't wonderful, because I'll probably write a book too, but the problem is much, much more complex than that. It's not just the 12 things that were developed by Gallup. Those business models of the engagement companies were basically, they were business models around selling the same normative database over and over and over again so you could benchmark yourself against your peers. That doesn't really help you that much. You need to know why your company isn't engaged and what your company could do better. And it doesn't matter that the other guys down the street are doing something that makes them better. I mean, maybe that's a good idea, or maybe it's not a good idea for you. So now it's an issue of how do you actually understand the employee experiences in your company. It's not the employee experience, it's the employee experiences. Every employee has their own journey in your company. New employees have one journey. New managers have another journey. Senior execs have another journey, using the language of design thinking. So we need to now get to the point where we're thinking about employees the way we're thinking about customers. All those different segments of our customer base are exactly what's going on inside the company. And so one broad survey that tries to, sort of cookie cutter everything that we need to do to make the company better isn't going to work the way it used to. And you've seen that. We've seen that in companies that have done these engagement surveys. They're still doing them, but they're not sure they know what to do about the results. So the answer is now becoming very clear. Tools like Rajiv's tools that get feedback directly to managers on a regular basis, pulse surveys done by HR. When I was in Canada actually it was this week, I was up there talking to a group of people. Someone from Amazon.com came up to me and said, in the warehouses in Amazon.com, we do an engagement survey every day. Every day we know how people feel about work in every warehouse, every manufacturing, or every distribution center. Well, do people lie? Maybe they do. But if you don't have the data, you don't know what's going on. So this is happening. This problem is getting fixed. There are, we have Glint as a sponsor of this, which is another amazing company in the Bay Area. Some really good, powerful new tools. But you need to take the job of instrumenting the workforce and making sure these are industrialized and operationalized into the business, and that the data is going to the management team, not to you. By the way, here's the other thing that I thought was always silly about the engagement surveys. The engagement survey would take months, then it would go to HR, and HR would look at it for 3 months and fret about it, like, oh, we can't tell people this. And that was just, there's no need for that. Managers need to see the data immediately. The new Pulse survey tools, most of them produce the data in a form that a manager can see that immediately. Maybe the next day. So, maybe a few, things are taken out just, to prevent, harassment. But that data has to flow much more regularly. And then we have to do what is obviously called journey maps or design thinking to look at the segments of the workforce that are most important and design solutions for them. When I was in Canada, I met with RBC. RBC is a very forward-thinking digital organization. They're a bank. And they decided that the most critical employee segment they have at the moment that they wanted to focus on was the first-year employees in the branches, because they had a high turnover rate, a lot of onboarding problems, a lot of issues with recruiting. And so they did a series of interviews and journey maps of what it's like to be a branch employee for your first year, the first day, the first week, the first month, and so forth. And they studied it, and they found all sorts of things they could fix. And so a team put together a series of learning programs and apps and things to help them that improved the retention of the first-year branch employees by 30% a year later. Now, I don't think any generic engagement survey would have ever identified the set of things that were needed for a first-year employee, in a company like RBC. So that's what's going on here. We've got some IP on this that we've published, and you guys can read about this in Toledo University Press. It's more complicated than it looks. For some people it's development, for some people it's the management, for some people it's comp and benefits and inclusion, and feeling a part of the team, work flexibility, job flexibility. These are all things that are important to different people at different times. I like to think about work as a series of life journeys. My stage of life is at a point where I can go on the road and I can travel a lot and I can do stuff that I never did when I had young kids. When I had young kids, if I had to have a job like this, I would never have been able to do it. And ditto for people that are in their early 20s. They can do things at work and they have expectations of work that are very different. So my suggestion on this is think about the segments of your workforce. You don't need to have 20 segments, but maybe it's 5, and how they vary. We're doing a case study right now in a company in Germany that actually is going through, they built 10 personas, and they're looking at all of the characteristics of high performers in each of those 10 personas. Everything from their work environment, the technology environment, the tools they need, the kind of management tools they need, and they're using that to redefine all the HR practices in the company so that they're very pinpointed, targeted towards these 10 personas in that company. And this is a very, very sophisticated company for doing this. I think that's kind of where this is all going to go for all of us. I won't talk too much about performance management because I know a lot of you have done this, and Rajiv, can tell you more about it. It has happened. It is this, this horse left the barn. No more articles to be written on why to do it. It's more, just do it. And it's not about eliminating ratings. That was the original concept. It's really about creating a continuous process. And so now it's pretty much called continuous performance management. That's pretty much the buzzword that's stuck. All of the research we've done shows, you can't read that, but every single metric we have ever asked people about the performance management process is that it got better. I have yet to interview a single company that's reinvented performance management that didn't tell me things got better. It was so bad. It was so broken. The end of year performance appraisal was so not working that even doing it quarterly and doing quarterly reviews seems to be, a major breakthrough for companies. So this one's still out there. I don't think we're going to be writing about it much longer. I think this is kind of becoming mainstream. But the problem is the tools aren't there. Other than, Reflective and 2 or 3 other small companies, it's very hard to find software that does this well. Workday hasn't done it yet. Oracle hasn't done it yet. SuccessFactors has a product that's in early stages. And so you're going to have to go to Rajiv or one of his competitors to find the right tools, which is a great opportunity for him. So I think we've got 3, 4, 5 years of revolution in the tech industry, in the HR tech industry. I have another whole session on that I could do another time, but that is going to reinvent the software. If you think about what I said in the very beginning about org design and how people do jobs and work, we need software for that too. All of the HRMS software that you have bought is built around hierarchy, and everything in the software is built around the hierarchy, and all the approvals and all that stuff. So there's a lot of things that have to be reinvented. So, but performance management is one that most companies are saying they got to shop around. And the one piece of advice I'll give you on this, and this is what Rajiv has seen with his customers, is you can't buy this software based on features. You have to buy it based on experience. When Disney did their evaluation, they didn't just look at the companies and the features and go through, all of the capabilities. They actually took the software in-house and let people use it to see if they would use it, if they could use it. Because if you don't use this software, it's not doing you any good. So this is a much, much higher bar for software developers to build a tool that actually allows you to improve your performance at work and doesn't feel like it's a distraction that you have to do because HR is making you do it at the end of the period. That's much, much harder to do than it looks. And I think the other part of performance management that has yet to play out is the growth in the market for well-being solutions. Well-being and wellness is usually in a different part of HR. It's usually in the comp and ben, or it's usually in the insurance or benefits part of the HR department. I think this is going to migrate into the performance management part of HR, and you'll be a lot smarter about what drives performance when you understand what drives well-being and what keeps people healthy at work. So this is another thing to put on your list of things to do. There's some amazing new tools in this area that are coming out. Most of the software companies that are building this stuff are small companies too. And so I think this is, one of the directions that will help us improve the, engagement issue in organizations as we go through this transformation. Okay. Now let me talk about leadership, because that was what I was supposed to talk about, and I didn't talk about it at all. Sorry about that. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, Seal. This is a very busy chart. I like to do these because it helps me kind of figure out what's going on. But I think what's going on is also, this morning in the Wall Street Journal, I don't know if you saw the article, I tweeted it out there. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal about the fact that there's a series of senior executives in companies like Ford Motor Company that are 30 years old, that have very, very, very senior jobs. Mark Zuckerberg is 32. Very young leaders taking on extremely big responsibilities with very senior people working for them. And I think we are in the middle of a really big revolution in the philosophies of management. The philosophies of management evolved over time. During my career, I probably joined, the workforce somewhere around here. It was Jack Welch, and it was Good to Great, and all of those books about, the original sort of Harvard Business School kind of, top-down management and strategy, and all of those articles were written. I think a lot of that is getting rewritten right now. Topics like purpose and meaning and citizenship are management practices. They're not just HR practices. Inclusion is a management practice, not an HR practice. Building a learning organization and thinking about the concept of growth as a business strategy is a management practice. That's not an HR practice. Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, and I've never met him, but I've read a lot of his stuff. But I've been to Microsoft many times. Microsoft used to have a philosophy, and they will say this publicly, that they were the smartest people in the room. They would go to customers and tell them what to do. And they were. That was Bill Gates' way. He built that company. He outfoxed IBM, for those of you that were around in the 1980s, and then he kind of outfoxed a bunch of other companies, Lotus and all those other products he built. But then all of a sudden, Google and all these companies came along, and Microsoft wasn't the smartest company in the room. And Satya Nadella's new strategy for Microsoft is we're not necessarily the smartest, but we're going to be the fastest learning, and we're going to learn faster. And look at how Microsoft's turned around just in the last year. Microsoft's really on a tear. So that's a management practice. These are things that were probably not here. So when you think about leadership and who you assess and develop and decide goes into leadership, the models that we need today are a little bit different. Not radically different, but they are different from they were in the past. Most companies tell me, and this is changing, but most companies tell me that the way you move into leadership in our company is a hazing process. You stick it out. You suffer through the process, you take the jobs, you do the work, you take the developmental assignments, and somewhere around your 15, 20, 30 year, you make it to the top. If you survive, if you can beat out all the competition, you become a senior executive. And obviously you have to hit your numbers along the way and make as many friends as you can. That doesn't necessarily work in a company that succeeds through innovation and change and learning. That's not necessarily the right model. So the new models of leadership are different. We've done research on this. The research that we did 2 years ago, this is now available in Deloitte, in the Deloitte consulting business, on high-performing companies, shows that high-performing companies have 23 management practices that are very unique and different. They're more experimental. They spend more time in sensing the outside world than they do sensing the inside world. They are very respectful of people. They understand how to move people from team to team. They are inclusive. All these things that sound good because they look good on websites and articles are actually being proven out as the management practices of the future that we need to use in assessment of leaders. I think most leadership development people know this. I think most of you that are in HR understand that this is going on, But I don't think big companies, for the most part, have figured out how to reinvent their assessment and create a more inclusive culture of leaders. And the second issue is we haven't necessarily promoted leaders early enough in their careers. I mean, Deloitte is a little bit of an exception to this. In Deloitte, everybody who moves into leadership is doing it for the first time, and it works fine. Because in Deloitte, it's okay to make mistakes. You get a lot of support, you get a lot of coaching. That's just the way the company works. Agility and constant reinvention is part of the culture of Deloitte. That's not true in a lot of companies. A lot of companies, if you take a big assignment and you fail, you're out. That's it. You know, in IBM, they used to call it, they'd send you to Siberia. You'd get a job, in another division somewhere for 3 or 4 years, and then maybe you could come back later. That is the old culture, and I think a lot of companies still have that. So there's a lot of reinvention going on in leadership. I had a meeting I think it was last fall, with the head of leadership development for a large pharmaceutical company, and she said, here's the kind of problem I have. I have a general manager of one of our largest divisions who's in his maybe late 50s, early 60s. He's worked his way up through this company his entire career. We now have somebody underneath him who is far more capable of driving the organization forward than he is. I've asked him to step aside and work for this new person. He refuses to take the job. He's telling our leadership that he will quit if we do this, and we have no choice. We're going to have to either let him go, or we're going to have to find somebody else to take that job. That is going on in companies all the time. And I think there's generational bias we have to deal with. Young people have to be comfortable with older people working for them and respecting older people. You know what really burned me up? I got to get this off my chest. When I was in Toronto last week, and they just had apparently the CEO of Facebook for Canada up there at some conference, and he made a comment along the lines of, organizations have to hire more young people. There's too many old people. And I thought, and Zuckerberg made a comment like that several years ago. That's part of the problem too. It needs to be, we have to be okay with young people taking on senior responsibilities, and we have to be okay with more senior or older people taking on other responsibilities, but not necessarily being thrown out. Especially if we're going to be living into our 80s or 90s, older people are going to be around a long time too. Those articles haven't been written yet. We went through the wave of articles about millennials. Now we got to have the articles on, what to do with all the people in their 50s and 60s who still want to have thriving careers too. So anyway, there's lots of things there. One piece of data I'll share with you on leadership. We, using our methodology, we looked at over 100 talent practices in 700 or 800 companies, and correlated which talent practices were correlating against high levels of cash flow and profitability, and grouped them into 4 levels, which is what we do in our research department. And we found that of all the things you do in talent management, recruiting, learning, all that stuff, the practices that were the most differentiating practices were those that created an inclusive talent system. That means people feel that the way people are promoted, the way people are hired, the way people get raises, the way people get developmental assignments is inclusive. People feel they can speak up. People can talk about mistakes. I'm really proud of the research that's coming out next week or the week after in our diversity and inclusion maturity model. I think we've figured out why D&I is such a horrible issue. I mean, it comes out every week. There's another article about another company that something's going on in that company. This is a very big part of leadership. Leaders have to own up to this. Great leaders are inclusive people, or they've learned how to create inclusive teams. I don't know if that was written in the Good to Great book in the 1980s as the role of leaders, but it is today. And the research shows that we have a gap between reality and perception. 70 some odd, the research that's going to come out next week, you'll see this. 70 some odd % of the companies we surveyed said that they believe they have a highly inclusive culture. Only 11% actually do, based on the data. So there's a lot of wishful thinking amongst executives, and hiring a head of D&I and HR is not the answer. That's not going to solve it. That poor person's job isn't going to be possible if the senior leaders aren't held accountable. And another one, I just want to touch on this, that is another piece of data that I think affects it, is young people are more focused on this than ever. The research that Deloitte did on millennials, this blew my mind. This is another one that came out a couple months ago that I don't think we promoted enough. 70-some-odd% of millennials are volunteering, donating their time, participating in community service. It's part of their ethos. It's part of who they are. They believe in citizenship. Citizenship and inclusion are really almost sister cousins of each other. So if you want to build an organization that thrives, you have to think about all these things in a holistic way. And I think this is another kind of dimension of leadership that probably hasn't been explored enough. The final couple of points I'll just wrap up, because I think I don't know where our timing is, but let me wrap up with a couple more things and we'll do some Q&A. HR itself has to reinvent itself. We have to become digital. We have to use tools like Reflective and other tools in a more experimental and aggressive way. We have to be willing to throw away some of the old programs that didn't work and start over and use design thinking. One of the simplest way I think about digital HR doesn't mean buying a bunch of digital software and making everything work on phones. It means doing things that people want to use in work that improve productivity and meeting people in their jobs with tools that help them do their jobs better. That's not what most HR software is, and that's not what most HR programs are. Most HR programs are an intervention that takes you out of the flow of work to do something that's important to the HR function, so then you can go back to work again. And that's why tools like the new performance management tools are taking off, is because they are productivity tools, not just HR tools. I actually think one of the ways that HR is going to reinvent itself, and really in many ways the new identity of HR, is as, in some sense, the productivity department. If people aren't productive, you should be willing to question anything you question as to why. Is it the performance management process? Is it that they're underskilled? Is it the organizational design? Is it leadership? Is it the physical environment? Is it the office? Is it the fact that people are stressed out and they don't have enough sleep? Any one of those things could be important, and they all sort of fall into the realm of what we think of as HR. So I think one of the ways to think about your job is, am I focused and consulting with the organization on productivity? Am I doing things that will help people get work done faster in a more effective, quality way? And if not, maybe this new program I'm working on, isn't the right thing to be spending time on. And that's changing HR a lot. And then, of course, I know you're going to hear from John Boudreau, but the structure of HR is changing too, and we have some interesting data on that. This is going to be big. I think one of the things I would also recommend you do is talk to your CIO and get a sense of what he or she is planning on doing for workforce tools, because these new tools are really coming fast, and they are going to change the way people work and where they spend their time. And I think most of the HR software we buy is going to have to plug into these tools, just like we've been trying to get software to plug into Outlook, which is another kind of really innovation that Rajiv started. But this is going to be the new work environment over the next couple of years. Here's my story on this one. We took a bunch of CLOs up to Microsoft for a big CLO forum, and we weren't intending to sell them anything at all from Microsoft. We were just talking about digital learning and all the different technologies. And we showed them Degreed and PathGather and Edcast and a bunch of other tools. And they looked at all this stuff and they were very fascinated by it. And then we had a demo by Microsoft of Microsoft Teams. And it blew their minds. And they said, wow, we don't want any of that other stuff. We want this. We want Microsoft Teams with learning solutions built in. And the Microsoft guys were kind of surprised, because the Microsoft guys they didn't really understand, the types of video learning interventions and things that they could potentially build into their software. This is software that changes the way people behave at work and where they spend their time. So I think this is another disruptor to the HR profession, is how these tools are going to be used at work and how we're going to take advantage of them. Another huge area, of course, is analytics. You all know this, being out here in the West Coast. The analytics market, I'm getting a little tired of it. I've been writing about it for a long time, but it's not. It's maturing in a certain way. What happened in analytics for the last 4 or 5 years is most companies hired a PhD or an IO psychologist, and they tried to build retention models and did a lot of statistical analysis and projects. You know, maybe they read John Boudreau's book about the Disney sweepers down, that story. And they said, oh, well, we've got to find out who the critical talent segments are in our company. They did a lot of projects. And you know what I found from a lot of CHROs is they got fed up with that. They fired those people. They disbanded those groups. They said, you know what, those groups didn't really help me that much. I didn't get that much out of it. I think we're moving to another stage of maturity analytics, and now we're saying, I don't really need a model. I want data in the hands of line leaders with enough metrics and dashboards that they can use it. Give them a real-time dashboard on engagement. Give them a real-time dashboard on goal alignment. Give them a real-time dashboard on work grievances or travel schedules or turnover or candidate pipeline, and let them decide what to do with that information and get out of the middle of trying to analyze it for them. Yes, you still have to do projects to analyze the organization, and we do have to do that in HR, but that's not enough anymore. And so I think the new world of people analytics is distributing the analytics into the organization, not just doing it as a PhD project inside of corporate in the HR department. And I know that because I've had at least 3 analytics groups over the last year tell me that their teams were disbanded because the projects they were doing were viewed as too academic. So that's my sort of warning, is that we're kind of getting past this stage to this stage in the world of analytics. And luckily the tools are getting better and people are getting better at this, and there are a lot of case studies and umpteen conferences you can go to hear about what different companies are doing. The other thing that's new in analytics is this. Going back to the very beginning of my talk about organizations, the only way you will really know how your organization functions is by studying it. And if you want to study your organization, you can now get software that does that. It's called organizational network analysis. These are incredibly powerful tools that are mostly sold by small companies. This is another opportunity for Rajiv because, and I'm actually not kidding on this one, his software has a lot of data about how people interact. So a lot of the O&A analysis you want to do is going to pop out of your next generation performance management software because you'll see who's getting feedback and who's giving people feedback. But basically, these are tools that will show you how projects are actually getting done. They study email metadata and they study data in your organization, and they're becoming pretty good tools. I had a guy in the office yesterday, a very, very famous guy, who used to be the CFO of a large company that just is part of a startup that has software that actually measures, it doesn't read the emails and actually decompose what people are saying, but it measures the sentiment or mood of the emails. And he said, you can use this software to, like in an accounting firm, and you can spot audits that are likely to be high risk by the tone of the conversations of the people working on those teams, which is a really interesting idea, and it certainly makes sense to me. So this is another area of analytics that I think is really going to be becoming important. The final thing I want to talk about just for 1 minute or two is this idea of automation and AI. My general feeling about AI is it's a very sexy phrase right now. It's actually just another form of analytics. It's different algorithms, but it's just analytics in an even smarter way. We probably will be talking about it for a year or two, and then this word will disappear too, just like digital. It'll just be called software. But the reason it's so important is right now it is accelerating in growth, and it is automating a lot of things that used to be jobs, and so a lot of jobs are changing. Customer service jobs, sales jobs, engineering, the audit job in Deloitte is under attack. What accountants do, what lawyers do, all of these jobs are being further automated by software. When we studied this in the Human Capital Trends, what we found was that 41% of the companies that were surveyed said that they expect their company to be fully automated in 3 years. which is an absurd idea. But it just tells you how much automation's going on. But the other thing we found is that, first of all, most of those companies are not laying people off. Most of the things they're going through is redesigning jobs, retraining people. Most jobs become more human and more social when machines are added. They don't become more technical, they become less technical. They become more human. So the types of jobs that are created are actually, jobs that are actually leading to better jobs and more high-value jobs in most opportunities. And they actually, by the way, they also happen to be jobs that are usually better for women. There's some research done that says that the jobs of the future are actually more attuned towards the kind of skills that women have, not the kind of skills that men have. Even though that's probably a biased statement. But the other thing that came out of this is that of all these companies that we surveyed, 80% of them said they're doing these projects with no help from HR. HR is not involved in the automation projects. So the sort of the message, I think, to you and to us is all of the things that we know how to do are relevant in these automation projects, and we need to be involved in them. So when your company goes out there and buys a robotics RPA tool or an AI tool or whatever it is, and it goes into the customer service organization or the sales organization, you should be involved and you should talk to them and take a look at what's going on and see if you can help them with the job design, the organization design, and the skills that are needed. I don't think HR people have spent enough time thinking about this yet. I don't think this is an issue of AI being a frightening new technology that's going to put us all out of work. I think this is just a new form of automation that we just all have to be comfortable with that will transform our organizations in a positive way. And I'm hoping that AI is one of the secrets to productivity, that productivity gap that we seem to be in. And maybe the AI is going to be the secret to taking all this technology and making it a lot easier to use so we actually can get more work done and spend a little bit less time clicking on our phones. So anyway, and here's the data on that. And I think there's a little bit too much hype on this and a little bit too much fear, and it's a little bit starting to die down. I'm writing an article that's coming out in May or June in DU Press on the future of careers. There's some interesting data out there on how AI is changing the job market. Jobs that used to be very hot jobs 5 years ago aren't so hot anymore because they're getting automated. And you can look at that information and think about it in your organization too, because it'll help you decide, help line managers decide who to hire, what kind of skills to look for in the future. Okay, so to wrap it up, and then I'll stop and we'll open up to questions. I think there's 4 major things for an HR professional to think about. Number 1, get comfortable with the employee experience as an issue and think about everything you're doing, whether it be performance management, learning, onboarding, engagement, in the context of the employee journeys in your company and in some form of segmentation. Number 2, take a serious look at the organization design and whether it's helping or hurting. We had one of the most successful tech companies in our office, Sheree, you were there, I won't mention the company name, telling us about a culture project. They were trying to build an innovative culture. And after 4 or 5 hours of discussion about what was holding them up, what we finally concluded is the problem was the org design was preventing, you know who I'm talking about, was preventing people from working on innovation projects because no one wanted to work on an innovation project unless they felt they could get promoted. And there were 30 levels of job promotions in that particular company, and they had a culture where you couldn't even get into a new department unless your boss talked to that person's boss, and then they talked to that person. You know, and this isn't a very old company. This is actually a tech company. But that kind of stuff this is our job, is to deal with that and to take that head on and to bring it up to leadership and try to reorganize it and restructure it. Number 3 is to act and behave in a digital way. Be comfortable with digital. Be comfortable. You may need to build or buy a vendor that can build apps for you. You can hire Deloitte. You can hire a whole bunch of people to help you with that. Think about, experimentation, A/B testing, using data. Those are all things that are important in HR. And the 4th one I just want to talk about for 1 minute is something I didn't mention. Right now, the way I see it, everything in HR touches everything else. I have a hard time figuring out how you do anything in HR without thinking about all the other ramifications of all the other things I just mentioned. The D&I program is impacted by the learning strategy. The learning strategy is impinging on the performance management strategy. The feedback system is part of the performance management system, and the feedback system impacts the D&I program. All this stuff is connected. So this idea that you're going to have a bunch of little groups in HR, each doing programs in each area, is probably a bad idea. Yes, you have to have specialists, and in fact, you have to have a lot of specialization in HR, but the teams have to talk to each other. So just like the business side of the company has to be more interconnected and more social, so does HR. And if you're a global company and you have a service center in India and you have a design center in the UK and you have business partners all over the world, it's not as easy as it looks. But I do know, having worked with Unilever and Nestle and a lot of big, and IBM, and very high-performing big companies, they get their HR teams together and they talk a lot and they get to know each other. So I don't think it's possible to go through these kinds of changes unless the HR function is integrated and culturally aligned too. So that's the fourth one that I would leave you with, is do everything you can to make sure that your HR professionals are working together, cross-trained, understand what each other are working on, and moving from role to role and doing your own kind of job mobility inside of HR too, so you can understand what's going on in different parts of the organization. Okay, that's kind of my formal presentation, and thank you for inviting me to come over here, and it's been a pleasure to spend an hour or so with you guys.
Offering or Reflective, I should say, is hosting a tour of AT&T Park. It's a cool park, yes. So they said even if you're remotely interested in baseball, then this is a good, then it's a great tour. So for those of you who can join, please stick around. I think it lasts about an hour. So that's the agenda for the day.